I've seen a lot. Amid the celebrity allure of entrepreneurship, many exceptional entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. Hey, buddy. How you doing?
Hey, good.
Welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you being here, man. Finally, we get together, and I'll just introduce you for the listeners, if you don't mind. But Brian Mullins, we have Brian Mullins on the podcast today, and man, I don't even know how long we've known each other for.
Oh, it's been over a decade.
Yeah. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Brian Mullins is, I would say, one of the most highly regarded farriers in the equestrian horse jumping industry. He would probably jump in and say, no, that's not necessarily true, but it is
Yes,
absolutely true. He flies all over North America. Do you go to Europe as well?
No, I almost got to this year, but my rider unfortunately got hurt.
Oh, no. For the Olympics?
No.
Okay.
Actually, was just doing a tour of Europe, but.
Got it. So, but I mean, honestly, like you have, I'm going to say like there's no perfect, but you've perfected your craft, or you've really kind of, taken it to the next level. So, I've been really interested in having this conversation with you because, we've had a series of conversations in very recent history here, and Solopreneur comes up. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Brian, who I've known for a long time, who actually, worked with us when we were in the equestrian industry. And so he was one of our vendors or whatever, I don't know what you call it, but anyways, we would see you would come and work with our horses and did, an amazing job. And then now you've gone on, started your own podcast called Mullin's Farrier podcast. And I think, the reason why I wanted to get you on was to have this conversation because you have really, perfected your craft. You really, really have. You're an avid learner. You're one of the nicest people I've ever met. You're a stud. Like, it's like the first time we met, I remember I walked in the barn and I'm like, Jesus, this guy is awesome. Like every time I would actually, it's rare. I would leave the house if I knew you were down there just to come down to hang out and chat with you.
Yeah, I always enjoyed those chats.
Yeah. So you're just like, you're an inspiration. And so that's why I wanted to have you on. I wanted to have a conversation about solopreneur and solopreneurship and, the craft and the art and what you've done to be an avid learner, and then how you expanded yourself and got into the podcast, because there's so many people who that it's come up in conversation where they're solopreneurs and they're trying to look at how to leverage their business and how to expand their scope of the marketplace and what can they do to, create some passive income in their lives. And so I think that, this is, really going to be an interesting conversation about what you've seen on your podcast. Cause you have the most successful farrier podcast in your industry, I would say, in the world. So congratulations to that. Congratulations to all your success. Everybody meet Brian Mullins.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. As you can see, or maybe you can't, but my face just got more and more red as Dwayne said that, as he did that spiel. The one thing that I push back on is when you said perfected the craft. There is so much to horseshoeing that it makes it very unique in some ways, in that you can never perfect it. And that whole Dunning-Kruger effect, where the less you know, the more you think you know,
mm-hmm.
Man, that I've had my eyes open so many times where I thought that I would sort of achieved a certain level, and then I would go to the Heartland Horseshoeing School that I visit frequently, or a clinic, or a certification, and just got shown that, there is way more just the tip of the iceberg is what you see. There's so much to it. So that makes the job pretty intriguing to somebody like me who is very challenge oriented. If you get bored doing this, you're doing something wrong.
It's funny that as you bring that up, because, and so I actually have a couple basic questions, but
Okay.
we'll get through. But I mean, we'll get back to so the one thing that you were saying that is like, people would think, and when I say people, me actually was like, it's like, okay, a farrier, like, and for those of you who, I'm going to ask Brian, what is the difference between being like the word farrier and a blacksmith?
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
So a blacksmith is somebody who works with metal, and then a farrier is somebody who works with metal but specializes in horses and horseshoeing.
Okay.
So that's, yeah, I would tell people that I was a farrier, and they would say, "You have to apprentice for that? Which ferry do you drive?" So I started just saying blacksmith for the general public.
Right. Gotcha.
But yeah, a farrier is somebody who specifically works on horses
Yeah.
and
And,
shoes them.
and for the layperson, and I mean, this podcast is not about, horses or being a farrier or anything like that. I mean, that is a metaphor for everything that we'll probably speak about, which is, perfecting a craft. And, when you think about being a farrier, and we were in the horse industry for well over a decade. And my wife is a competitive show jumper. And so I've been around this. I mean, I've been around horses all my life, and since I was a young kid. And you think about horseshoe. You put the horseshoe on a horse, and everything is whatever. It's not that complicated, but like anything, you can take a job role business and execute it at its basic elements, or you can really perfect the craft and see it as a craft rather than just a source to make money and pay your bills. And I think that that's a whole different mindset. So I'd love to get your feedback on that, as you because when you're in your early 20s to mid 20s, you were selling horse trailers.
Yeah.
And then you became a farrier, or apprenticed to be a farrier, correct? And then much like you would a plumber, electrician. So in the trades, like it is, there's, I don't know how long your apprenticeship is as a farrier. So maybe you could kind of explain that a little bit, just so people have a little bit of context. But then really it's interesting, because what I've found with you is that mindset of taking, a role and developing it into a craft.
To go back and explain, in North America, we don't have, it's not considered a registered trade to be a farrier. Or anybody could call themselves a farrier tomorrow and go out into the world and put shoes on horses. And the more you know about that job, the scarier that whole idea is. So I've spent a lot of time in England and interviewing British farriers who come, like in England, it is a registered trade that they have to follow an apprenticeship, go to school, and pass a very serious exam in order to be a farrier. If they go out into the world and just start shoeing horses, they can actually be charged for it. Yeah. So North America, I think it goes back to the rebellious roots of leaving the kingdom and having a ruler where it's free market and anybody can be a farrier. But we do have their voluntary certifications and exams that you can do as a farrier. So when I started my apprenticeship, I just worked for a gentleman. I worked for him for 5.5 years. I started my own business and built up a business as I was working for him. But it really wasn't an official apprenticeship. I learned a lot off of him, and I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity. But when I was done, I just had this feeling that I knew there was more to learn.
Can you just talk to me a little bit about that whole process? Because there's so many people who struggle to go out and start their own business. And I'm curious on your strategy. Like you just mentioned that you work for a guy and then you started your own business on the side while you were working for him, which to me kind of sounds like a bit of a conflict of interest when you're working with another
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
so,
That's, I
so
mean, that's kind of part of apprenticeship, I guess, in Farrier is there's always the risk that your employee is going to go out and maybe even potentially take your business, which you hope they don't, but
I think I'd be interested in your journey, especially on the, psychology part, because, you weren't intending to, it wasn't like you was your lifelong dream to be a farrier. And so you go and you spend a few years with this guy and then you decide, hey, I'm going to go out and start my own gig. Um, was there a shift in terms or a strategy in terms of how that was going to be executed? Because there's so many people who struggle with, they want to go out and start their own business, but they don't want to leave the security of the full-time gig.
right. Well, so for years before I found the farriery craft, I was floundering. I wanted a purpose. I wanted that career. And I tried several different things: landscaping, selling horse trailers, um, music, sound engineering. And I wasn't finding my place. And as soon as I went for one day with the gentleman that I apprenticed under as just kind of a trial day, and I thought, I got to try this. This has got to be it. I'm going to leave my ego at the door. I'm going to learn as much as I can off of this person. And I'm going to try and make a go of this. And he was a very successful farrier, still is in his own right. And I saw how it was interesting because the first full day that I worked with him, there was another apprentice there, a gentleman. He wasn't even an apprentice anymore. He'd worked with him for years and was just helping him out. And he said, "Yeah, not many people get to charge what he does." And I thought, huh, that's strange. Like, why wouldn't you want to get to that point? And that gentleman, he maybe shod for one more year after that, and then just disappeared, ghosted all of his clients and disappeared. But I saw the potential to work your way up, especially in the sport horse industry, where it's a hard game to play. You have very demanding clients who need very sound horses to perform at their best so that they can do their best when they get into that arena.
Not to mention their emotional ties to
Oh yeah.
to the horse,
Yep.
which is next level too.
Yes, for sure. And as it turns out, I know it seems like as a farrier, you're just putting shoes on horses. There's a heck of a lot to that. And horses go lame a lot. And there are a lot of things that can go wrong. And there are a lot of ways that just by the appliance I put on the bottom of their foot, I can make them feel better or perform better or not. So, but then making that transition. So when I started with Andy, the gentleman I work for, I felt like I was behind the eight ball because I was 28 years old and starting in this new career. And I uh, just, I sucked up every bit of information I could out of him. I bought the textbooks that I could get my hands on. I read as much as I could. I attended every clinic I could. I started going to a few competitions, which was a whole other thing that people probably aren't aware of. People, horseshoers get together on a weekend, pay money to shoe horses in front of other horseshoers and have them tell them how they could do it better.
Wow.
And that's a whole thing. And anyways, so as I was building my own business, the thing with horseshoeing is when you're apprenticing with somebody, you make a fairly low wage, but then you can shoe a few horses or trim a few horses and make what you did in a whole day in a couple hours. And that's where there's a bit of an incentive mismatch there. So you get a lot of people who just learn in this particular career, just learn enough to earn money, and they think it's good money, and then they just go out on their own.
Right.
But there's so much more, and you end up plateauing because there's only a certain type of horse you can work on and a certain type of clientele, because your knowledge to get them out of the ruts that they fall into with lameness and everything else, just it isn't there. So you end up plateauing.
So it's an interesting, I'm just going to dissect a few things that we just talked about there
Sure.
that you brought up, because so it was really interesting to me because the model that you just kind of presented that, and I probably want to kind of clarify before so I'm not misunderstanding, but if you're a farrier and you bring somebody in to apprentice underneath you, you pay them a small amount of money. So you're really incentivizing them to go away out on their own, to create their own thing, really. And I don't know if people look at that model like to change it a little bit, or because how do you keep people?
So that's the interesting thing. In England, you have to do that apprenticeship.
Right.
So you earn that little bit of money, but it's to get you a career. Now, the mindset you have to have is you could either pay and go to university and learn a career, or you could get paid. It's not an insignificant amount of money. And I pay my employees quite a bit, and I know several other farriers that do. But it's that you're learning how to be self-sufficient and to go out on your own and become another higher achieving farrier
Right.
out in the world.
Professionalizing your craft a little bit more, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yes, the incentive structure, it really just depends on the attitude of the person approaching it. And unfortunately, for most people, they see the fast money and they don't happen to see the value in the learning experience. Because I even now, I only take people who have gone to a school, because I found that if I just took somebody on without any knowledge, I spent a lot of time training them, and there's so much attrition in this business. It is not for everybody. It hurts your body. Clients are hard on you. There's a lot of demands on you, and so a lot of people leave it. So I would put all of this effort into training people, and they would leave. Whereas if they paid money, gone to a school, and put in that effort, I knew they had a foundational basis to go from, and at least a little bit of skin in the game, basically.
Yeah. It's interesting what you just said there, that people are they leave early. They don't really take the learning curve and sit inside the learning curve and leave early for the money. And I think that's, I just actually had a conversation last night with somebody about that, going, sometimes you, especially early in your career, when you're starting out, the push is to chase the money. But I was, my advice to this person was, it's like being a farmer. First you sow and then you reap.
Exactly.
You have to stay in the suck, as they use that term, and really kind of, start to learn your craft, take your time, mentor, coach, work with somebody who is already an expert to learn the craft and develop the craft. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the interesting thing about that I learned pretty quickly, so I would reach out to other farriers, not more than just the gentleman I was working for. If I had a day off or on a weekend or whatever, I would contact other farriers who were pretty high up in the industry, and I would ask them just to hang out in their shop. And it was amazing how much education I was able to do for the price of a bottle of whiskey, because that's what I would bring. And they wouldn't take money, so I would ask whatever their favorite alcoholic drink it was, and most Farriers it's whiskey.
Yeah, right.
So, so, um, it it was pretty incredible. I kept thinking, this is my cost of tuition. This is nothing. And people, when I'm always amazed at how many people I've come across and how many I've interviewed where if you just ask them, they will help you and show you what you need to know. And it it's just, yeah, that kind of a trade. But yeah, if you are chasing the money and don't want to go through that journey, I think I think it's an actual this is a point of contention for me that I've done a lot of thinking on. And I really think we've really glorified the people who've made the easy money, the people who come up with a great idea and they get paid off because somebody else buys them up and or pays for the patent or whatever. And that easy money goes. Or the YouTubers that all of a sudden have thousands and millions of views and earn a living that way. And everybody sees that and they want that easy money.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, those situations are like winning the lottery. They're so rare, but those are the ones that we glorify. We don't glorify the guy who spent 10,000 hours learning their craft.
Yeah. Well, and this is, you know what, this is exactly what this podcast is all about, right? This is
exactly
why I created this podcast, which was, you know, I'm not looking to put famous people on, you know, I know a couple of famous people, like real brand name guys and women. And they're like, oh, you know, people have asked me, well, would you put them on this person or that person? It's like, no, I that's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about people like us who are putting in the 10,000 hours, that are grinding it out on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, look, I think there's luck has to happen. You could do the right thing at the wrong time and it works out, and you could do, or it doesn't work out. You could do the wrong thing at the right time and it works out and you look like a genius. Sometimes you just do need a little bit of luck. Like I think there's always a factor of, like, I always figure, well, I'm going to factor in 10% kind of luck or serendipity or the universe or grace or whatever you want to call it is going to, you know, kind of come into play for me. But
that's a good heuristic to work on, because yes, it does play into it.
Mm-hmm.
Big time.
Yeah. But you've touched on a whole bunch of things here in the last kind of 10 minutes that I think are, you know, items that are in the face of, you know, anybody who's, you know, looking to start a business. So they could be, you know, whatever age, they could be 60, they could be middle-aged, they could be young, and also people who are kind of coming out of school and looking for something. But there was the couple of things that I really thought were, you know, interesting that I'd love to touch base with you on, which was one, your search for purpose. I'd love to kind of dig a little deeper in your story for the search for purpose and the psychology around that, because that is something that comes up all the time that I hear. The other thing is like your story about the Farrier who said not too many people get to charge what that guy charges. You know, so like whatever you want to call that, your value for money, your time for money equation, because a lot of people struggle with going, hey, how do I raise my rate when everybody else, the average person, is getting paid X, but I want X plus 1 or 2. And then, you know, you brought up two other, well, one of the things that I took away from what you were saying was your intense, your intensity around learning. And and I know you're an active learner, so love to get your perspective on that. And then the other thing that kind of honed in one was on the competition side. And if there's one thread that I think, you know, you could kind of weave into most successful people is they're competitive. They're hungry, they're competitive, and they want to win and they want to be better. And so that kind of all ties into one. So I don't know if you want to start with search for purpose, but I'll open the door to all 4 or 5 of those things.
You might have to
pressure.
remind me of,
Pressure.
You might have to.
I got you.
Okay, good. Well, okay, we'll start with the purpose thing. It's funny. In meeting you, I didn't know from you, but I learned through other people talking about you that you're very close with Tony Robbins. and that was not something I was aware of. But so as a kid, um, I'll be a little vulnerable here. Uh, Depression has been something that I had suffered from the time I became a teenager, maybe even younger. So I had always wanted to find a way to fix that. And I would read every book I could get my hands on in that realm. And Tony Robbins was one of them. And some of the stuff that came out of that, I found really powerful and really helpful. And there were many more, and I still read lots of stuff in that realm. So sometimes I think finding your purpose, uh, I run into a lot of people through the podcast that are high achievers, and I think what they're doing, what we're doing, is trying to justify our place in the world. You know, we don't feel an inherent right to be here and take up space. We want to earn it. And I think there's a lot of people who that's their journey, and they do these things to just show people like, hey, it's like the external, you know, uh, what do you, I'm trying to think of the word, um, just external acknowledgement from other folks that, you know, you're doing okay, you're doing the right things, whatever. So I think it plays a very big role for a lot of people, and it did for me. So finding that purpose, in the end, I've kind of figured out. So with the horseshoeing, I've been able to make a big difference in the lives of the horses that I work on. And the more I learn, horses break all the time. And if I can make them more comfortable or be able to do their job, that's a challenge that I enjoy, but I also just enjoy helping those ones that have hurt themselves rehab and get better. And I've had people tell me like, I I really thank you for what you've done for my horse. Like, you basically saved its life. Sometimes that's what it comes down to, right? Um, so there's that aspect to it. Um, and then as I've sort of delved deeper, I've learned that my real purpose is I just want to make a difference for people. I don't want people to feel like I've heard it come up on your podcast several times where people talk about going through a period of depression or being depressed. And um, I think for a lot of people, I think the answer is they just haven't found their purpose. I think the enemy is nihilism. I think there's just a lot of people just don't have that beacon that they're following. I mean, we live in a world where religion is not nearly as prevalent as it was, and I think that gave a lot of people purpose and a beacon. And I don't think that is true for most people now. And now I think a lot of people are floundering, trying to find. I feel like I've used the word flounder a lot in this podcast.
It's okay. We'll edit it out.
Okay, yeah, put in a different one for me.
Right?
But I'll get the thesaurus. But just they are trying to find that, and I think some just kind of never do, or just don't put the effort in to do that. And for me, I needed to find that answer and to find that purpose. So the horseshoeing, it put me on that journey because it gave me a bunch of challenges. You can spend a lot of time thinking about doing things. Like, I've heard you talk about people who come to you with business ideas and they're just not sure how to execute them. But I think you've got to pick something and put the work in and do it. And it is going to suck. There are periods that are going to suck. I heard you say, like, if you have a life without challenges, you're probably not doing something right. Like, you're not going to push yourself any higher. You're not going to get what you want. So, yeah, I think that, I don't know if that answers the question, but those are all things that kind of played into it.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So, and if you don't mind, I mean, you open the door. And so like you talked about depression and that search for purpose. And earlier in the conversation, you had talked about like, trying 4 or 5 different, careers, and they didn't work out and they didn't resonate. And I mean, I think that is happening. You could be 50 years old and, you've been working for 20 years with in a career and going like, this isn't resonating with me. And whether that's because you've shifted, your environment shifted, your thought processes have shifted, or it just never resonated from the first place and you just stayed in it because I got kids, I got a mortgage, I got this, I got that, whatever story you put behind it. But I'm curious if you could just kind of share like how did the depression kind of show up for you, and what was it that kind of helped you shift through that whole process as you kind of went along to find your purpose? Because it sounds like you were, experiencing depression at a young age. So, and you didn't find being a farrier till, you were in your mid-20s.
Yeah. And the depression thing, I think it really struck towards, like I found in high school when I decided not to go on to university because I didn't know what to do. It just started showing up more so in September when everybody would be going back to school and I was working a labor job and just doing a thing that wasn't really taking me anywhere. So that kind of began that journey for purpose. Now I can say that horseshoeing, it became a driving force for me. It gave me purpose. I had a challenge, but I'm a bit extreme. And what I ended up doing is just working as much and as often as I could, which turned into 7 days a week. I heard about your rigorous work schedule when you first started out, and we had very similar ones. And mine was not as extreme as yours, but yeah, like 14-hour days, 7 days a week. And I finally burnt myself out 10, I guess it was 10 years in. And then I actually sought out a therapist. So I used the reading and everything else to kind of get me to that point. But then finally I had to, you know, get help, get
Yeah.
professional help.
Well, good
Yeah.
for you. I mean, and everybody experiences that. I mean, I've had the same, I've dealt with what I would call depression. I don't know if I framed it as depression at the time, but well, I mean, I did, but I mean, there was one, I remember one time, I didn't tell the story. I just got interviewed on, last week on the podcast. And, I talked a little bit about some of the struggles that I had, but one thing I didn't kind of bring up because I really didn't think about it, but as you had talked about depression, I'll share this. This is your podcast, but sorry, I'll just jump in because I think it's beneficial to the listener. It's like, but when I was young, I almost committed suicide. I was living in London, Ontario, and I was broke, and I had explained that on the podcast. And I remember the address of the build. I don't remember anything, but I was living at apartment 710 in Kipps Lane. I think it was 465 Kipps Lane, apartment 710. And, in my mind at the time, I had lost everything. And I went back to the apartment, and, my options were go home and face, everything, all the mistakes that I'd made, or, end it. And I remember, I literally got to the point where I went to the balcony and I was about to climb up on the edge of the balcony, and I looked down and there was this massive tree. It's kind of funny, right? But now it's funny, but there's this fucking
in your way,
massive tree in my way. And I'm like, fuck, I'm going to jump off this fucking ledge and I'm going to screw this up too.
Yep.
And honestly, obviously I wasn't, it was, and I think people have to understand, and we've had friends with kids who have committed suicide, and there's a moment in time, and I share the story, I guess, because I want people to understand that there are times where, you can look at somebody and go, oh my God, they must have such a great life or this or that or anything. And I went with for ebb and flows for years. My depression would show up in February. I had like that seasonal depression, and the month of February was brutal for me. And I felt, for whatever reason, and there's, I think, one of the things that I've kind of learned, or one of the, that I've adopted, one of my beliefs that I've adopted, is that people commit suicide when they don't feel like there's a compelling future. And if they can't see a compelling future, but sometimes that is just in a moment. And I encourage people that, if you ever get to the point where you feel like you don't have a compelling future, you need to pick up the phone and call somebody. And it's not necessarily even to share with them what's going on. You should share with them. You should call a hotline. But if it's just to call a friend and somebody who loves you, to realize that, hey, what is currently going on in the exact moment that you're in, it is not necessarily dictate, what your future is. It's just in the moment. And so, I appreciate your, honesty with that. It's the first time it's really kind of come up in the podcast. And so I honor you for, your courage and your strength to just kind of, bring that up. And I just also want the listeners to know that, look, like, you've had your bout, I've had my bout. I can rhyme off a whole bunch of other people that I know have had, these feelings. And so we encourage you to reach out and to somebody. So,
well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So one of the reasons I started the podcast was suicide's pretty prevalent in the farrier world. As I said before, it's a pretty tough physically on you. A lot of people are dealing with chronic pain that have been doing it for years. Backs and basically every part of your body that you use. Nothing about the job is ergonomic. But then you're also dealing with people who are criticizing your work that actually don't know most of what you're doing. They just have a concept, or they saw something online and have decided that you're either good or you're not. Whether anything's even changed with their horse, or one of the common phrases in the farrier or in the horse world is blame the farrier.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, I think a lot, and a lot of people, a lot of farriers have, I think, burnt themselves out trying to people please and just keep it all going. And so one of the reasons why I started the podcast was to just be able to have conversations with people and share like the experiences that they were having. Like some of these top people, you get that idea in your head that they never have a problem with a client, or they've never been fired. And they all have. And
they're just posturing.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. And some of them not even like it's just as soon as you ask them, they'll full on tell you, yeah, oh yeah, this happens all the time, or and it never gets any easier. But I've had people reach out to me online, in person, and say, thank you for what you're doing with the podcast. You really showed me that I wasn't alone.
That's awesome.
I've had that multiple times.
Congratulations, because you're not wrong. Like in that industry, it's like, and I would just, for the listener who doesn't know anything about horses, I would say, how I would kind of frame, this whole kind of, that part of the conversation is imagine being a mechanic of a car, and you finish, working on the car, everything is working perfectly, and the car goes and drives itself into a wall by itself, right? Like, yeah. That's what horses do. They go, they can go into their stall, or they can go out into the field, and they kick kick the wall, or, get themselves caught up in something out in the field, and they come back lame. And that could literally happen, the same day that you were there to shoe the horse, and all of a sudden it's the farrier's fault, or whether it's 2 days later or 3 days later. But it's interesting, how I was just kind of framing like that story about the podcast and the value that you're adding to people's lives. And then I reflect back, because earlier I just in my notes, I wrote the word certainty and I circled it, because you were talking about, well, your passion for and how you help horses and your passion for helping horses. And, when you were explaining that story, it was, one of the things that I reflected on was what I believe you bring is that, that your craft and your art and how you're able to, use your art to help support, in this case, an animal to perform at its highest level. And it could be a personal trainer who's helping an athlete to perform at its personal trainer, or a coach who's using mindset and coaching people, business people through, or, people who work in the mental health industry who are working with people, like they're helping the performance of something. In your case, it's horses. But it's interesting, like what I find you bring to the table, just knowing you and you having worked with us before, is that the other real piece that you add is this value of certainty that the client has. It's like, okay, Brian's coming and he'll know what to do. He's going to fix this. He's going to, like, there's this level of certainty when I talk to people in the horse industry about what you do. And I'm not making this about you. What I'm, if you're listening to this conversation, the conversation is whatever it is that you do, whatever your craft is, whatever your art is as a solopreneur, you have to provide so much value, and that value is meeting people's emotional needs. And that's what you do. You, like, people have so much confidence in your ability that you meet their need for certainty. And you're just like an awesome guy to be around too. Like, not to pump your tires, but they also then have a connection, like a connection with you. So it's fascinating to me. And this is what I want the listener to take away, or at least this is what I'm taking away, is that you are, you are working on your craft, but you're providing real value. It's like if somebody has like a race car or like a high performance car, they only want to take it to one shop because that's who they trust to work on that vehicle. It's not going to come back with a scratch. It's going to come back working. Everything is going to be, and so you provide that value, and then you've created an extension of it through your podcast. How I relate this into our next topic is, that increase in what you're able to charge, on whether it's a per visit basis or a, per horse or whatever. And this could be if you're, a massage therapist. Like I know a guy who's a friend of mine who is, started off as a massage therapist, became an osteopath, sorry. And, but as a massage therapist, like, average massage therapist charges what, 130, 150, 120 bucks, for a massage. He's like charging $300 because he gets results. He's perfected his craft. Like he has really, it's probably an exaggeration to say perfected, because he would say the same thing that you said. There's no such thing as perfecting your craft, but
yeah,
he is always moving forward in creating that value to people, and he's able to charge for it. So I'm curious on your take on that from a psychology standpoint for other solopreneurs who are looking to say, hey, what are the components that they have to get to in order to create that value and be able to earn a higher level of income because of it?
right. Well, so one of the points that I thought of as you were saying that, I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name. I know he's a big hero of Heather's. So I'm sorry, Heather, that I don't remember his name. He's a marketing guru, but he talks about knowing what business you're in, like McDonald's being in the real estate business. And I thought long and hard about it. And as a horseshoer, you were in the trust business. And that is what you're bringing to the table. That is what people get, what your clients want out of you. Now, unfortunately, in in that trade, in many, sometimes it's just confidence that sells. Like there are people who are highly unskilled, but they have all the confidence in the world. And that confidence is what gives people faith in them, right? And I'm for better or worse, I'm not wired that way. I have to feel confident enough in what I'm talking about, and I have to have that knowledge base before I can feel confident. So that is where the learning and educating myself continuously has come from. And that as my career progressed, I just kept increasing my price because I knew that my value had increased, and that if I didn't increase my price, the perception of my value would actually decrease.
Mm.
And does that make sense to you?
Oh no, that's you need to say that again so the listener fucking hears that, because it is so true.
Yeah. So in the farrier world, you will have people who charge a fortune, and people will complain about it because people will complain because they have gone beyond their affordability, say, and they're shooing for top people. But sometimes those people are charging a fortune, but they don't actually have the skill set to back that up. And you will see they just kind of fizzle out. They lose their clientele and they just disappear. But if you're a good shoer, but you are charging very little for your service, and I know some really talented folks out there, guys and gals, who are highly skilled but don't believe they're worth it and don't increase their prices. They don't even increase their prices to cover for inflation, and they end up with some pretty bad horses to work on, like bad horses, bad clientele, bad environments to work on them. And I think that translates to any of the businesses that like we're talking about as solopreneurs. You have to put your price positions you in a certain point in the market. But if you don't have the skill set, or you didn't go through the suck to get that foundational knowledge that justifies your place there, you're going to lose too.
Yeah. So, I mean, look at it's, those are, I'm going to sum that up because I think it's really powerful. So basic, like what I'm hearing is, you need to educate, you need to grow, you need to work continuously on your craft. And if you don't, and you try to charge more, you're going to fizzle out, or you're going to be working with the lower end clientele that you don't want. And that falls kind of in my philosophy of, you know, the goal in life is not to have problems. The goal in life is to have quality problems. If you have a quality customer, you now have more quality problems. And but I really want to ask, like, so because you interview these people on a consistent basis and you're around them, and so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because you have so many touch points with people out there in the solopreneur bucket, if I will, that they fear raising their prices. There's whatever level of fear. So what have you seen that you've gleaned that causes that, and what's your advice to people in terms of getting them over the hump? Because as you said it, I could have flicked off 5 or 6 people that I know are in the solopreneur bucket, and they're not charging enough for what they're doing.
Yeah, I have this conversation with several of my peers. I think there are a lot of differences on an individual basis, but the when you're working, we'll say in the context of horseshoeing with your clientele, every time you raise your prices, you're actually asking a question. You're saying, do you still think I'm providing you enough value that you will keep me on? And there is, I think, in any entrepreneurial endeavor, there is always this fear that you're going to lose a large chunk of your clientele. What if they fire me? Well, all of a sudden I can't make money. And that fear, I think, causes people to make some pretty poor decisions. Once you get to a certain level and you are busier than you want to be, that fear goes away a little bit. And when you ask that question of your clientele, do you think I'm this valuable? You know, some of them are going to say no, but you know it's not going to be all of them. And you know that it's enough of them that you will retain a certain percentage of them. You won't have to work as hard, and you'll still earn the same or more income. But it's having the confidence to ask that question. And I think if you live in fear as an entrepreneur, I get it. I was there, and in many aspects I still am. But if you live in fear, you're going to make poor business decisions. I heard I was listening to an episode, well, the one where Charlie interviews you, and you were talking about how business is a non-emotional thing for you. You like
Non-emotional, like,
that,
yeah,
yeah,
non-emotional sport.
yeah. And uh, I'm very guilty of applying a lot of emotion into it, and I think the horse industry as a whole, there is a lot of emotion involved. But I think that emotion of fear, it causes you to make some pretty poor decisions when it comes to business.
Yeah. And I'll clarify. It's like, there's a lot of emotion in business on the customers make emotional decisions. But as business owners, we need to be more, it's an analytical sport. So we need to be less emotional in the strategies and decisions that we're making around our business so that we can execute. It's interesting as you were saying it, the kind of the thing that popped into my head was like, people have this fear. Well, there's two things that popped into my head. As you were saying, you raise your price and you will lose some customers, and people get very fearful about that. But the opportunity in that is that it gives you time to go out and find better quality customers.
Exactly.
So like,
and it happens every time.
Right. Every time. Right. And then because there's so many times where people go, oh, well, Brian's so busy. Like, I'm not going to refer him this person. I know this person that, oh, you should use my Farrier, but he's so busy and I'm not giving up my spot. So,
Yeah,
right.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's like, we had a girl on the podcast. Her name was Sophia Plank, and she does fascial stretching, and she's amazing at it. And like, it's like, I'm very protective of trying to be able to get in to see her, but it's like if I don't book ahead, I'm 2-3 weeks to try to get in to see her. And it's like, and that's painful sometimes. I'm like, oh shit. So it's like, try to, I do refer a lot of people to her because she's really good, but I also, on one side, I'm going, man, like she gets too busy. I'm never going to get in. So it's
right.
like,
yeah.
It's interesting from that perspective. But also the thing that I was thinking about on the fear side is like, it's really interesting to me because fear is an unknown. We're always creating fear in our mind of like, oh my God, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And they're all what ifs. If you really kind of analyze your internal language, it's always what if, and therefore it's the unknown. But here's the other side of that coin that I don't think people think about as much, which is the other side of that coin is another F word, and it's faith. Faith is also the unknown. You brought up religion earlier in the podcast, and it's interesting to me that, people, when you believe in a religion, whatever religion you believe in, it is also an unknown. Like, you're not going to know until you die about exactly
whether you were right.
Where am I going? Where am I not going? Who is it? Like, what does it look like? How's it going to be? Like, there, it really is. It is faith. And so however you look at that and attach whatever meaning or story you attach to that faith, it's like, I always try to think about like, okay, really, what am I afraid of here? I'm afraid of the unknown. Well, on the other side, faith is also the unknown. The fact that we jump in a car, drive down a highway, and we think that this magic yellow line is going to protect us. We're executing on faith that somebody's not going to come across that yellow line and smash into us. And so we really, I think sometimes in business, need to remember that as we're making our strategic decisions, that we have to have a little bit of faith.
Yeah. Something you said there also made me think of the word scarcity.
Mm.
How we just said, you lose some clientele, but every time you end up picking other better clientele with better problems to fix. If you operate from that scarcity mindset, you make decisions that once again are fear-based, and it's a pretty bountiful world. I'm always amazed. I often think like of the limitations that I think exist, and then how often those are always blown out of the water when you look a little deeper at them.
I'm curious when you bring that up, because the scarcity versus abundance mindset. Like, have you always been like that, or is that something you had to
I had to
develop
learn that.
into?
Yeah, I had to learn that.
What that process look like for you?
I I think it was just through the business that I really learned that mindset, because when I first started out, every time I lost a client, um, I would just freak out. Like, this is going to be the end. I'm going to have to hand in my resume at McDonald's and go from there. Like, and uh, each time that happened, and a new client within a week would pop up, um, it it just showed me that, wait a second, you think there's this limited number of potential clients out there, and actually it's a pretty large number. And I'm fortunate, I live in an area where there is, um like, we're just as horse the horse population here, I've heard, is just as big as Kentucky, or it was at one point in the Golden Horseshoe here in Ontario. So yes, I'm pretty fortunate. But I think in a lot of different industries, people think that there's only, like, you lose that one client, well, I will never get another one. Like, that was it. And the life just kept teaching me that, well, no, there are others. They come along. And hey, it turns out this person actually trusts that what you're doing is right, and you don't have to explain yourself every day, and you now have a much better work day. Like, there, all of those things just kept happening, and that sort of switched my mindset on that.
Did that develop as you started through your learning process of your craft? Like, it just came with that confidence and competence. Is that where you feel like it grew?
Yep, for sure. It was, ironically enough, when you ask that. So one of the higher exams with the American Farriers Association is your certified journeyman farrier. And it was something I thought was completely unattainable, but I went through the process and got it. And within 2 months of getting that, I lost three of my biggest clients. and and they I had started shoeing better, more appropriately, and it wasn't drastic changes, but I think they were enough that clients just thought the things looked different. So and no matter how much I tried to explain that what I was doing was better and trying to save their horses from injury, um, I yeah, it just I ended up losing those clients, and I that was a real panicky moment for me, of course. And I thought, well, these are it. Like, those were three of the best in Ontario. What am I going to do? And then a week later, I got hired by another who actually turns out to be really high end in Ontario,
The
and
other
it
three
just
best in Ontario.
yeah, right, yeah, and it just and then as I worked with those people, now, because I had done all the studying, one thing about doing an exam, I think humans, we, our brains use up so much energy. So our default mode is to take the easier route. So when I would read a textbook before doing an exam, like before I had an exam on my goal list, I would just read the textbook and retain a little bit of it. But when I was studying for an exam and had to regurgitate that information, all of a sudden I was reading textbooks in a whole different way, right?
Right.
And then when I started communicating with vets and clients about the issues I was seeing popping up, or uh, just something that needed their attention, I was able to talk, especially with the vets at their level, using the anatomical terms, and just having that really increased my clout in the trust business. And then the vets started to believe I knew what I was doing. and
Right.
and then it carries on from there, right? So yeah.
I love that you say you're in the trust business. Like, that to me is such a distinction, that listeners probably need to identify with or pay maybe more attention to, because, if being in the shoeing horses business versus being in the trust business are completely two different businesses.
Yeah.
Like,
and you approach them completely differently.
Well, and you need to create a different identity in order to be able to approach them in that way. And I'm curious, as you're talking about it, since you brought it up, it's like, what did that look like for you in terms of like you recrafting, your identity towards what you're doing?
I think in some ways I had to be more, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Well, one thing it's kind of unheard of for most farriers, but I just started like making notes on what I was seeing. I saw what the vets were doing and realized they're record keeping on everything, and I'm relying on my memory, which self-admittedly isn't great. And um, I need to, hone in on some of this, actually hunker down and take notes. And um, I started hoof testing every horse. Now, I know this is very industry specific, but it was something that other people weren't doing, but it was a way for me to get ahead of problems. Instead of reacting to them, I was actually able to be proactive and get ahead of stuff. Like, hey, your horse is a little sore. Maybe if we put some pads on it, we can avoid, down the road having a different issue that's
Right.
way more serious. So I'm trying to think if I'm answering your question in the appropriate way or not.
Well, it sounds to me like you were taking more of a consultative approach.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Rather than, hey, I'm just going to come in and do the job.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And definitely just telling people at the end of the day, I saw this, this, and this, and I could explain why, and what that potentially could mean. Whereas before, you just kind of shod their horses, hope they liked what you did, and carried on.
Right. And hoped you didn't get fired. Or,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Or hope that they maybe made a referral.
Yeah.
So it's to me, it's a huge distinction. And if I'm, as my brain starts to turn on it, it's like, because I kind of always ask the question, like, what would be the thought process? Like, what question would you have had to ask to get to that kind of conclusion of, and to me, it's like ties into the identity piece of, if you're looking at yourself as being in the trust business, then you need to be a trustworthy person. And in order to be a trustworthy person, you have to ask yourself, well, what would I have to do in order to develop, create a trust business and be a trustworthy person? Well, maybe and maybe the words weren't coming out exactly this way, but it's like, well, I need to be a consultant. I need to be looking and caring for the horse in a way that my competition isn't. And to me, that's what that sounds like. And and this is the beauty of being able to have a conversation with a farrier. And how does this apply to somebody who's doing massage therapy or owns a landscape business or is, fixing automobiles or motorcycles or whatever it is, or a painter, like whatever you're doing, plumber, electrician, it is, looking around and answering a higher level question of, rather, like you said, just coming in and doing the job and then getting the hell out and getting on to the next job, is, how can I be of much greater value to the customer? And in your situation, it's like, I'm in the trust business.
Another aspect of that, these are going to seem like two very different things, but so for farriers, often you'll see farriers, they come in, they're dressed like a farm laborer. They wear a t-shirt, a ratty pair of jeans, and get to work. And there's this perception problem where farriers often complain that the vets have more clout than they do when it comes to like opinions on fees. But the problem is a vet shows up at the barn dressed in a collared shirt with khaki pants and nice shoes, and the farrier shows up dressed like a laborer, and there's this perception problem. So there's also a level of professionalism, and then where the correlation is, I heard your interview where you were talking about the restaurants that you run and how you check the bathroom. That is something that has always been in my head, whatever business I was in, even when I worked at the trailer sales business. If a client goes into a bathroom and the bathroom's disgusting and messy and in disarray, there's going to be a whole perception that is not what you want as the owner of the business. So I think part of that trust is showing that you're also a professional. There's a big push for that in England with their farrier education programs. They really push that it's not so much a trade as it is a profession now. And I think that's where a lot of that stems from.
Yeah, these are really important pieces for people, especially in the solopreneur kind of marketplace or bucket that I keep referring to, is, I just want to recap it so they don't lose it, but it's like, what business are you in? What business are you really in? And what are you really doing for your customer? And then how are you showing up for that customer from, and there's probably more, like if there were more, what would they be besides the professionalism? Like, actually, I meant to say this earlier for a perspective for the audience. Like,
right. Yeah.
Guys, Brian works on, horses that their values could be anywhere from $50,000 to how many millions? Like, what would be the most expensive horse we're not going to tell them, they're not going to say their name, but easy over $1 million.
I don't know. Over $1 million. Yeah. I had to raise my liability insurance this year because I didn't realize how low their only reference point was racehorses. So they were covering me for $30,000 a horse.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I know some of your clients and I know you have several horses that are worth over $1 million.
That's not going to work.
So, this is just for perspective of the audience, because they may not know anything about the horse world or anything about fairs, but you got your hands on some pretty high price assets that are not just assets. They're like kids. They're like children to their owners. They're part of the family, and they're well protected. And sorry, back to the question, but and just to remind you, is like, so showing up as a professional, what else would there be that you would say like solopreneurs need to really think about as they're, looking at their, I'll call it art. There's, to me, we've talked about this before on the podcast. There's the artist leader, there's the manager leader, and there's the entrepreneurial leader. And most solopreneurs start as artist leaders, right? They're really good at a craft, or they're really passionate about their craft or their chosen career, if you will call it. And they just, that they have an art around it, especially the most successful ones.
Yeah. So one thing that comes up a lot, if I'm interpreting the question right, there's something that I see in the Farrier world is that you have these highly
Right.
skilled people. They go to competitions and bring home all the ribbons, that kind of thing, but they are terrible with dealing with people, and they just would rather not. So they would rather just show up, do their job, and go home. And you you want to focus on your craft, but you have to wear all the other hats, or it just doesn't come together in the same way. So part of being in the trust business is you also have to be likable. And I've shown up on days like, I know being authentic is good, but being authentic, if you're having a bad day and you're just not feeling it, you can't show up that way to your clientele because it
Oh no,
shows. And
it's bang on.
they
Like, I mean,
they
it's
question that.
completely bang on.
So I think that plays into the perception. Would that kind of play into what you're asking? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's for your clientele, especially if they're there, it's the whole experience. And then even from the business side of things, if you don't invoice the people right away, if you like, that is something, if you don't keep your schedule, if you don't show up on time, or if you can't show up on time, if you don't give them sort of a heads up that you're not going to be there, all of those things, that all is part of the package. And that you
Yeah,
have to
I
be
mean,
considerate
these
of
things are
what
really,
is
really
going to
critical because it is
offend
the whole
or
package
appease
to
your
which you
clientele.
present on a consistent basis, and that's why we've said so many times on the podcast, like, the language of business is accounting. Sorry,
Exactly.
you know, you chose to get into it. Like, it's like, if you're gonna go live in Japan, guess what? You're probably gonna have to learn how to speak Japanese, right?
Yeah.